Welcome to episode 509 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Jake Teeney. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. How many times have you seen an ad and thought, who approved this? Our lives are bombarded with ads these days. We can all spot a bad one from a mile away. Some are offensive, some are confusing, some are comically bad acting, others are just plain boring. So if we all know immediately that an ad is bad, how do they ever get made? And would we do any better making our own ads? My guest today, Dr. Jake Teeney, and I will be discussing just that. What makes a bad ad, the different types, and top mistakes so you can avoid them and do better while keeping human behavior in mind. A little bit about Jake. He received bachelor's degrees in both psychology and philosophy before getting his master's and PhD in social psychology from Ohio State. He is presently the Donald P. Jacobs Scholar and Assistant Professor of Marketing at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He broadly researches the science of attitudes and persuasion, striving to answer questions like, what makes a personal message, advertisement, or recommendation persuasive? What leads people to spread word of mouth about an idea, product, politician, or otherwise? And how do our thoughts about our thoughts influence our evaluations and behaviors? In researching these and many other topics, he has published empirical studies both in top-tier psychology and marketing journals. He has written reviews on influential behavioral research, and he has provided theoretical frameworks in academic chapters for conceptualizing the study of our opinions and beliefs. He's written for Psychology Today, Highbrow, and often through his longtime blog, Everyday Psych, and more. In addition to his work conducting and translating science, fun fact, Jake also regularly writes and publishes creative fiction with dozens of short stories and screenplays published in various literary magazines like the Saturday Evening Post and nationally renowned writing competitions like Short Story America. He continues to actively transform the daydreams in his head into entertaining stories that comprise a wide variety of genres and forms. It's going to be an interesting conversation for sure. Really quickly, before we get into it, I want to make sure you know there are links in the show notes for my top related past episodes and books, ways to get in touch with Jake and myself, and more. It's all within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/509. Now let's jump right in. Dr. Jake Teeney, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about bad ads today. Before we jump into that, for everyone who doesn't yet know you, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a associate professor of marketing at Northwestern University in their business school, Kellogg School of Management. My research and focus is largely on the psychology of social influence and persuasion. In fact, that's what I got my PhD in, social psychology. And now I apply that a lot to understanding what makes advertising effective, or as we'll talk about today, ineffective, and how we can use that also both as consumers and brands and in professional settings.
Awesome. Well, I think this is going to be a really fun one, as we're going through this process. So you and I spoke originally. It was the Monday after the Super Bowl, right? Or it might have been the Tuesday, but like when we had our initial conversation as we were figuring out, like, what are we going to talk about? And we were talking about Super Bowl ads, and it kind of led into this conversation of the good and the bad and the ugly, right, of advertising. And I think the Super Bowl is, a good example of people really, really paying attention to ads. So first, of course, we want to make sure to acknowledge all of the amazing people doing fantastic work, even if every so often an ad is not what you dreamed it would be.
I mean, it's true. There's so much work, so much time, money goes into these. Like, everybody really deserves. That's why they have these advertising awards now, right? Like the Effies and things like that, because, they deserve applause. But, even like movies, which take a lot of money and time and resources, you get a bad movie every now and then.
Yes. So with that in mind, let's talk about, how does this even happen? How do these bad ads even get made?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, especially after coming off saying how much money and time and energy goes into them. And I mean, we've all seen bad ads, right? One question I often get in my classes is like, is there really good and bad ads? Isn't it all subjective? And it's like, come on, you've seen a bad ad. You know what a bad is, right? You cringe, you hit skip, you ask who approved this. And there's tons of different examples. Now, I think when thinking about bad ads, there's really kind of two forms broadly that you can think about. You can think about ineffective ads, right? Maybe they didn't change the opinions. They didn't generate kind of the awareness or attention that you might want for putting money into an advertisement. And then you have the other form of bad ads, which are just offensive and like really upset people. Both of these are wasted money, but they kind of have different paths to how they emerge.
Yeah. Well, let's, make our way into the list here. So we can start with the ineffective ads. I think, we all have kind of an idea of the ones that are going to backfire, right? And what can happen with that, but we'll dig into that too. But I think there's a lot more to learn in that space of ineffective, because from, conversations we've had here, especially, you may really win in one category where it feels like everybody remembers the ad, but no one remembers who did it, or what it was for, or what we're supposed to do, right? So they can be kind of sneaky in their badness, right?
Yes, exactly. Insidious, one might say. I think ultimately, and this is true for both ineffective and offensive ads, is it really comes down to either a lack or kind of a failure of strategy. I mean, strategy is so important, especially in marketing, when you're really dealing with psychology and persuasion, which are not easy things to do well. And it's difficult, coupled with the fact that marketing moves so quickly, right? You've always got to be, what's the new zeitgeist? What's now popular? And trying to move that fast often means you don't move with the strategic mindset. But taking some time ahead of time, and this is often what I teach in my class, will save you money and energy down the line. My mom's favorite quote always rings in my head: haste makes waste, right? And so taking a moment to sit back and think strategically what your goals of your advertisement are meant to be is probably one of the most effective ways, just simply to eliminate or reduce the likelihood that you have an effective ad. And when thinking about this strategy, the first step is always, well, what's the point of this? What's the objective? Advertising, and as you've talked about on your show, any kind of purchase behavior goes through some kind of consumer funnel. Probably at the broadest level, you can think about it in terms of first raising awareness about the brand or product, then generating positive attitudes or opinions toward the brand or product, then actually eliciting action, getting them to go and buy or try the product. And then, at the bottom of the funnel is like action repeated, getting them to do it again. And I think a lot of times advertisements are ineffective because they're not realizing, hey, when you're focusing on trying to change someone's mind, it's not just this broad overall persuasion. You want to focus on a specific element in that purchase funnel because you're going to employ different strategies to be more effective at each of those.
Right. So we want to make sure we have a goal in mind, seems obvious, but so often, like you said, when we're trying to just react quickly and get something out there, we can kind of miss the mark. So you had the haste makes waste, and I was wondering if you were going to do the measure twice, cut once, kind of same idea, right? Being really thoughtful about what it is that you're trying to do. One of the pieces of advice I know I give people here in this point as we think about those goals is often tend to think way too big in what the goal is, which is then very vague. And that is where we can miss, even though we say, well, we had a goal, but like if your goal had too much going on, or, something just like, well, we just want them to buy. It's like, yeah, but there's so many steps in the process before you get to the point of them buying the thing. And like, maybe you just need them to like leave Instagram, right, to get to your website, which is, or TikTok, even harder to get somebody to go do something. And so, that first impression is maybe more of just knowing that you exist and that they subscribe or follow or like one of your pieces of content before you kind of keep moving, or that they don't skip that ad or whatnot. So do you have some examples of what you would say are some good goals if we're going to avoid, we go from, definitely have one and
Sure.
we don't want it to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on kind of a key oversight that happens even at some of the top brands is they make their objective very broad. And what you need to do is you need to be specific. I'm trying to increase awareness that my product is eco-friendly for, this specific use case. And the more specific you can be in your objective, the better you'll be able to bring that out and show it in your advertisement and communicate that. We'll talk a little bit, I think, later about kind of failures of positioning or failures of main message takeaway. And a lot of this comes down to people trying to have too many messages or too many points of difference or too many value props, right? And that specificity in your goal will help you specify what it is exactly that you want to get through. The world is such a noisy, loud place, especially in the world of advertising. And so the only way you're going to actually get anything kind of across to your consumers is to have a very specific kind of goal in mind. And sometimes that goal doesn't mean that it's going to translate into business sales immediately. There's a long-term debate in marketing between brand building and performance marketing, getting those clicks, right? That performance marketing or that brand building kind of generating positive opinions toward it. And it depends differently on the brand, the product, the life cycle. There's a classic example in advertising from Apple's 1984 ad. And this is when they were kind of first releasing ads about their personal home computer. And it's this crazy looking ad kind of based on the ideas of 1984. You don't really even see a personal computer in the ad, but it's so distinct. It's so attention grabbing. It just builds awareness about this, right? That's kind of their goal of the ad. And then they had other elements of the advertising campaign that then supplemented with that, that information about, well, what actually is a personal computer? How can I use it in my daily life? If they tried to do all of that in one ad, it wouldn't have been effective. But by specifying specifically what their goal was, they were able to focus on attention, which is going to be, kind of the main drivers of getting awareness.
For sure. I love that. And such a great example in being able to know that this one big ad, this kind of splash we have to make is that we're investing in helping people to even know what we are and be curious to go learn more. Right. And
Totally.
That curiosity gap is so key when it comes to getting people to go do anything, right? That you want to go learn. There are some of these ads I've seen where it's like even like a billboard, where it's the like, I hate such and such.com. And it's like just a URL and they're on a black or red or whatever. There's one, and I forget where I would have seen it, but
there's I Hate Steven Singer is actually.
Is it the jewelry?
I Hate Steven Singer, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see it all. They're all over Chicago. I think they started in Pennsylvania.
Yep. So I've probably seen it when I was in Chicago, and that was part of that piece. But
now I will say, I've seen advertisers do this a lot, this kind of curiosity appeal, and I actually generally warn against it. Because oftentimes the people that are going to be curious enough to go and look to see what it is aren't necessarily the consumers who are going to buy it. And also, consumers only, we're consumers, right? People only have limited amount of time and they're not necessarily going to spend that on advertising. One of my favorite quotes is, people don't watch ads, they watch what entertains them. And sometimes that's an ad. And I think we overestimate how interested consumers will be in some kind of catchy slogan. The Steven Singer one, there's a bit of a story. When they first released those billboards back in Pennsylvania, it was accompanied with like a big kind of radio push as well, talking about them being a jeweler. So there, it was kind of like the 1984 approach. You have this one kind of big splashy billboard, but then you were also hearing about it in other ways and getting that other information that informed you what it was and now made you want to go check it out. The issue with those billboards now is they're not running those supplemental campaigns. So in Chicago, I always actually ask students in my class if they've seen it. And, a handful will have seen it. And then I'll ask, how many of you actually went to the website? And I'll maybe get one person. And I'll be like, did you buy anything? And they're like, no, I didn't even know it was about jewelry. I was just curious, and then left. Right? So the ultimate goal shouldn't be just to kind of like, oh, this is kind of fun. People want to spend their free time looking up my advertising stuff. It should be curiosity about a key benefit that this person thinks is relevant to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've got to be a little careful with that.
Definitely. And I liked that in the way of the example with the 1984, and like you said early on with the Hate Steven Singer, that there was enough to help kind of when you were curious, and then you were able to find there was like connected stuff versus just one random billboard that, probably more college kids are going to look at that are maybe not going to go actually buy any sort of jewelry that you have. So just being thoughtful with any of it, of where you get that. And even if you get, then it's like, man, so many people went to the website. And then, did anyone buy anything? Right. Yeah. So that's where those goals matter. So, okay. So let's talk then a little bit, about what those failures are you talked about. So we've got, if you want to dig in maybe on, let's talk about failures of attention.
Sure. Yeah. So, when it comes to ineffective ads, I think one of the first roadblocks is just getting consumers' attention, right? Like we've talked about, there's just so much noise out there. How are you going to get anyone to kind of pay attention to what you have to say? I think this is probably exemplified best in the car ad industry, right? You look at any car ad and it's like fast car moving, rugged terrain, driving over rocks, right? They just all blur together in your head. And, the reason that car commercials do this is because this is what everybody's been doing. So it feels safe to do that commercial. But it doesn't get your attention, right? Recently, Citroen, I think that's how you say their name, released this really fun kind of long form commercial with an alien. And this woman is like driving with an alien in her car. And it's totally different, right, than any kind of your standard car commercial. And you're interested. You want to see what happens. And I won't ruin the punchline because it is a fun punchline once you watch the ad. But it was totally different and gets people to kind of pay attention a little bit more. There was a classic campaign here, maybe 10 years ago in the Super Bowl, where the car company, rather than putting their own ad up in the Super Bowl, they ran a campaign before the Super Bowl that said, every time you see one of our competitors' cars on the Super Bowl ad, tweet us on social media and you'll have a chance to win a car for your friend. And so you got it's just kind of shaking up the system in the way that people typically expect it. And that form of distinction, right? Not only just distinction in terms of your aesthetic appeal more broadly, but distinction between your category and how other people are advertising in there are a great way to really try to kind of build some of that attention.
Yeah, I love that example from the car in the way of like anytime you see our competitors do this, but it's like, you're almost guaranteeing that I'm only thinking about you when I'm looking at every other car, right? And so then when that one comes up, it's just to like throw away and tweet you that I saw the ad just to talk about how I like you better, right? Which is a really smart tactic. The other car one I was thinking of, there are two. There's one I remember always, but unfortunately, I don't remember who it was for, but it was at a time when I don't think I was like buying cars, right? But where it's all the people that they're like sitting just in the air and you can't see the car around them and they're like Saturn. Moving around. Okay, so it's a Saturn one. Mm-hmm. And then, and it's like the people are all in the bus or whatever, and there's no car, and it's so funny and awkward. But then you see like the actual car that stands out because everything else is just this sort of like sea of sameness. So I like that one. And also one where I do remember the brand, even though I haven't bought this brand before, but I know people that have, is the Subaru with the dogs driving and the like puppy family, as far as being that Subaru is like that pet friendly kind of brand. And it's, golden retrievers driving in their car with the puppies in the back, and it's adorable. And so we know that they love dogs.
That's great. I actually haven't seen that Subaru
No?
one. I'm going to have to check that out. The Saturn one is a great example, I think, of where just because you do awareness well, it doesn't mean, like, it's still an ineffective ad. You didn't remember who Saturn was, then right. Saturn's not doing too well. If you've heard recently, they don't exist. But so it goes to show you too, like when thinking about what makes an effective ad, sometimes people over-index on this idea of attention grabbing. And, that's not the only part of it, right? The other thing that, and we'll talk about in a second, is having that key message. Like, what do I take away from it? And in that Saturn commercial, the whole idea of the commercial is, their tagline is like, we see people, not sheet metal. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, you don't, and so, having an effective ad is, okay, you've got to have good attention. You don't want a slow start, right? We see a lot of this sometimes with ads where they think, okay, consumers will watch this till the end. They'll get that punchline, or they'll get, whatever is kind of good. And it's like, no, they're not going to do that. So you've really got to kind of start out of the gate fast, get their attention with something distinct. And then once you've got it, you've got to have a clear message.
Well, especially these days too, where ads come up when I'm, in the middle of a game and I just want to be able to get to the next level. And you're like, can I X out of this yet? And my 3-year-old now, like when he was little, even littler, I suppose he's still little, but he would go ad, like when something happened, he didn't want to watch it. And, all the kids just say, skip.
Totally,
we can skip finally. Right. So
I don't know if you've noticed, but YouTube changed its whole interface with ads. It used to have that like 5-second countdown before you could skip it. And they realized some 40, 50, some big percentage of people's time was spent just staring at that countdown number. And so now it doesn't show that at all. And the skip button will just appear in hopes that they'll drive your eyeballs to at least the commercial for the few 5 seconds.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Okay, so we talked about the failures of attention. We talked about then, when you can get attention, that's good. And it's not enough on its own. So what's the next failure? We've got the main message or being clear enough, and then memory, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the main message or the positioning or the value proposition, what is that kind of key point of difference that makes consumers want to choose you over the competitors? Or something people often forget, choose you versus do nothing, right?
Status quo. It's real.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we're Netflixified, all of us. We like, sitting right there and just hitting next automatically. So when it comes to choosing the right message, I mean, we could talk for hours on coming up with kind of the right positioning, the psychology behind it. And so, having the wrong message for the wrong target is obviously going to be difficult because they're not going to remember it very well, or it's not going to be very meaningful to them. But, two things that I'll touch on here that I think I see often, and one we already mentioned earlier, and the first is having too many messages. You think my brand does all of these great things. I want to put them all out there. And it's just, there's actually been quite a bit of research about the amount of memory people can allocate when you have like multiple messages or multiple value propositions in the same message, and each one gets a diminishing amount of attention. So when you have diminishing amount of attention on each of these different value propositions, well, now they're going to leave without knowing anything or really remembering anything. So having that one key message is so important. I think a good example of an ineffective ad in this space is recently Folgers has been trying to reposition itself, the freeze-dried coffee. And it's fallen a little bit out of fashion. But with COVID, a lot of people were switching to kind of home brewing and making iced coffee a lot at home. And Folgers thought, well, you know what? We could fit into this pretty well. And so they run this, it's a very energetic spot. It's got cool visuals, but they just have all these different messages of different ways you could use Folgers, different people using Folgers. And by the end of it, it's that classic, if you're targeting everybody, you're targeting nobody. And so if they had just focused on one key advantage, well, then consumers are going to leave that knowing exactly what Folgers does well and why they should go to them versus the competition or do nothing at all.
Definitely. And this is, gets sort of into that features benefits conversation that people have, heard so much over the years. And one of the examples I love to give in this category that I think does it well, where so many people get it wrong, is so we've all gotten the brochure, there are less brochures these days. Now websites kind of do this, but you would be handed the thing and it's like from the long list of all the things we do. And it's like you open it up and it's just like bullet points forever, right? And I'm not paying attention to any of those. I don't remember. And there's so many that are just table stakes things anyway, but people feel like, quantity is the way to win of like, look at all the things we do, but it doesn't mean anything. And so I think that Jake from State Farm, the original Jake, from State Farm is such a great example of a thing that is something that all of those insurance companies have, right? That you have 24/7 calling, like there's somebody there. And even just to say like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can reach us in our call center, like the bleh, right? Like it doesn't mean much to me, but having it be actually funny, which is that's really hard for people to be able to do, right? And the way he says khakis, right? And it's so awkward and hilarious, but you get that like I'm up at 3 a.m. and I call and Jake is there. He's here for me, right? Totally. And we remember that even though everybody else has it, they picked one thing that is like the least thing that they do, really. And it's made this huge benefit. And we remember that it's Jake from State Farm because they say it so many times, And so I think that is a good example of picking one thing and explaining it really well in a point that makes sense of the benefit to that consumer. And if you can make it funny, congrats to you. Kind of on that.
Totally. I mean, we'll talk about this in a second, but having your brand name or having your key point of difference come at an emotional high point, like a burst of humor, is a great way to improve memory. We'll call those creative amplifiers, where you get like that kind of like really high creative point come at the same time that your brand or your point of difference comes, and that really helps it stick in consumers' minds. And to your point about the messaging, I think even if you choose the right message, right, you choose the right value proposition, there's something in advertising we'll talk about called laddering, where you can discuss that same point of difference at a features level, like, okay, here are all the components that show evidence for why this is good, or a functional level. Here's the, utilitarian benefit it offers you. An emotional level, which is like that psychological kind of sense of well-being or confidence that it's giving you, or this higher order kind of higher purpose level, like what are you doing to kind of help society or people around you. And so, in having a good message, it's not only about selecting the right message and the single right message that we talked about, but then delivering it in the right form. Like you said, State Farm could have said that same part. Oh, we're 24/7. That means you can call us at any time of day, but they show it in a very kind of emotional, like makes you feel good, like the trusted neighbor, someone that's, friendly and kind of down to earth. And that's what people need, especially when dealing with insurance that often feels so complicated and convoluted. Having a clear emotional message helps it come through clearer, and then also helps it stick in your memory better.
Yep. Love it. Absolutely. Great examples there. And I know that you also had on your list here. So we have if there's too many messages, but also that they can be like too metaphorical, right? So you have the example of perfume and cologne. You're like, what am I even looking at?
Totally. I mean, there's another example I was thinking about earlier today too. Wealth Simple is like a financial advising group, and they got a lot of praise in the creative space. In the last few months, they ran a commercial where they had a slug as the main character, and this slug is like trying to just cross the sidewalk, and it's so hard, and it's supposed to be this like metaphor for life and how life's difficult, and Wealth Simple is there to like help you get through it. And I show it in my class, and so I ask, what do you guys think of this? Everyone's like, I don't even know what the brand does. Right. And so it's like, it's a very fun kind of entertaining ad, but it's just too metaphorical or analogical for what they're actually trying to sell and what the benefit would be for the consumer. And often we see that with perfume, but there's reasons they do that.
Right. Well, and I think the perfume is about the celebrity more than everything else, really. And if you get it to where the brand name and the product name is the thing of where they say, the one that comes to me, of course, is J'adore Dior, right? Like I will always know, I have no idea what that smells like, but I can always see Charlize, saying it all the time, right? You can remember that, right? So even though I don't remember what any of the ads look like, other than it's maybe her walking down a hallway or something. But I know that if someone was to say name a perfume, that might be one that would come to mind because the people actually say it very specifically in those ads. So they don't have a failure of memory, right? So if I'm in the market for some, expensive perfume, perhaps I'll check that one out. What are some issues that come up when we have that failure of memory?
Yeah, one of them we already talked about, and that's not having an emotional high point in the ad. If people are just they did this, Affectiva did this cool study where they took 1,200 people, showed them a bunch of ads. Some ads have these emotional high points. Some ads didn't. They were just kind of flat tonally. And then they brought them back a week later and asked them to recall the brand, the product, all these kind of memory related things. And the ads with emotional high points were the ones that were remembered significantly better. And it's based on classic research by Kahneman and Tversky, the peak end theory, where the idea is with any experience, we typically remember the emotional high points and the ending of whatever happened. And so having an ad that has emotional high points in the ad, and then especially at the ending, and pairing that with your brand or your point of difference is a really good way to improve memory for it. So that's a big one. That's a little bit more on the creative side. As a strategist, you can still try to encourage that, or at least keep an eye out for it. What's maybe more in their control is making sure that the ad fits within kind of their brand or their brand equity, right? Kind of the perceptual associations that people have about the brand. And I think, a great divergence or a bad example of an ad, and, everybody was talking about this, was Jaguar, the car brand's recent rebrand. And they repositioned for good reason. They're trying to make themselves a more expensive luxury car. They're going fully electric. So it makes sense to do kind of a sharp change in your branding. But it's so different than the decades, if not long, right, of history of associations they have with the brand, that it's just hard for, any kind of new meaning or new attributes to stick to it. We've seen this across the board, and Dos Equis, that's another example. The beer brand, they used to have this most interesting man in the world, and that really kind of connected to the brand. Then they got rid of him, and their later ads people don't remember them as well because they've lost or not employed some of those kind of memory architectures that they've established over years in consumers' minds, which again makes it harder to remember.
So with the Dos Equis as a interesting example there, because, even still, I think of the most interesting man in the world. And then they swapped out the original guy for, I think, Benicio del Toro for a while as being that, most interesting man in the world. But when it's working, I'm assuming something happened to where it wasn't as effective. But I know sometimes brands just get a little bit antsy, and in the if it, we got to change it because got to get ahead of it, or we're bored of making these ads, and so they go break things that are still effective. Do you?
Yeah, no, I mean it's more often the latter. I think probably strategically it was ineffective for Dos Equis to shift away from this. They felt internally that it was drawing too much attention away from the beer and to their mascot, which is fine. You're just a pretty normal Mexican beer. You want attention to be on something exciting other than you. But, the brand gets bored. You get someone come in and they feel like, I want to do something that's mine and something that's new. We actually saw something similar happen with Allstate and Mayhem, right? Those Mayhem commercials, people love them. But the brand was like, we've been doing this for a while. Let's switch to something else. And so they stopped showing them, and they actually got letters and messages from consumers being like, bring back mayhem. We love mayhem. And so that's exactly what they did. And, they saw their brand love dip when they stopped running those commercials, and they saw it pick right back up when they did it, when they brought them back. So I think this is, like you said, new, CMOs is one of the fastest moving executive positions in any business. And so when they come in, they're expected to make big ripples across the company. And one way to do that is to, mix up the advertising. But don't fix what ain't broke, right? If this ad is really working for you and people really like it and remember it, you don't need to change it. You can bring it to life in more modern and different ways, but don't lose what you have going for you already.
Definitely. There's that balance of the novelty and nostalgia, right? That we can mix in a little bit of that, but don't fully throw everything away that has been working, and try to do that really hard pivot when you have, a fan base that loves you. So one more piece on this kind of memory one, because I think that the Budweiser commercial with the dog and the Clydesdale is, I think, a commercial that everybody actually does remember. Like people know, and actually people know that it was Budweiser typically because of the Clydesdales where you see them. So why was this on your list of ineffective?
Oh, no, that was
ineffective, or
on
an effective one.
It was an effective ad, yeah.
I was going to say, how did this happen? What's wrong with it?
No, they do it all right. So they play into their brand equity, right? You hear Clydesdale, you think Budweiser. Great, right on track. They have emotional high points, right? You get that punchline at the end where the dog or the horse does something cute or saves someone, or usually involves beer and spreading happiness, right? And it's very distinct than any other competition. So that was an example of like, they're doing things right.
Oh, good. I was saying like, what? What's wrong with theirs? No, perfect. That's good ads. Okay. And so then, other last piece I see on your notes here being that if it's just too similar to what everyone else is doing, especially if you're not the brand leader, right? So, you have the example here of, oh my gosh. And so are we supposed to say verbo? Is that what you say?
I mean, that's what all the kids are saying.
I'm not hip. I don't.
I don't have time to say 4 letters. It's verbo. It's not VRBO.
Fair enough. Yeah, but their ads look too much like Airbnb and anything else, right?
It's not so much that their ads look too much like Airbnb. It's just that, and Verbo's in a difficult spot, but Airbnb, when they first kind of came on the market, their whole appeal was against hotels because you could get more space, right? And often cheaper. Well, Verbo is kind of making the same claims in their ads. You can get more space, but it's private because they're kind of going against Airbnb. And if you don't really pay close enough attention to the very end, you'll see that ad, and probably the dominant association you'll have is with Airbnb. So it's tough because, Verbo's point of difference, or VRBO, now you got me second guessing it. Is it VRBO?
I think they say Verbo in the ads, but it's weird.
Yeah. It stands, it's like vacation rental something. Airbnb is just like, they have those mental associations for much longer. So unless Verbo really kind of puts their brand name forward or chooses a different point of difference, it's a bit more distinct than Airbnb. At least if they're competing with Airbnb and not hotels, it's going to kind of trigger the memory a little bit more of Airbnb. I think there's a really classic example. Nike had a famous commercial for their Shocks. I don't know if you remember those shoes that have like the springs in the heel. And the commercial has this guy like streaking across a soccer match. And he looks very out of shape, and he shouldn't be fast, but he's got Shocks on. So he's avoiding all the security, and he's dancing, and it's funny. It's very intense. Well, a little bit later, Reebok ran almost like a point-by-point similar ad with a streaker, similar-looking actor running across the field, and only if you wait till the very end, when you see him get like tackled by this football player wearing Reeboks, you realize, oh, this is a Reeboks ad. And so you get this situation where you're triggering the wrong brand in mind for this positioning until the very end, and people are, they're either gonna turn the channel off. Oh, I've already seen that ad. Oh, I know this is for Airbnb. I don't need to pay attention, right? And so it's not going to help with memory for your brand specifically.
Great points. Love it. All right. So we've talked quite a bit about the ineffective ads. And like I said at the beginning, we know that the backfiring, we accidentally offended people. It was, and people get outraged real quick, right? So we kind of know what those are. I don't think we need to get into some of those specific examples as much, but, how does that even happen? What's like maybe one thing that we do, or if you want to quickly go through the list where people don't realize they're going to offend huge groups. How do we make this mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is brand managers they kind of get tunnel vision. Like if you've been working on something for long enough, you start to see it in a certain perspective. You start to think everybody's going to see it from that perspective, and then when it gets out into the real world, when people don't have the same kind of background or mental associations or aren't thinking about how this is going to be perceived in that context, it can really backfire. I think, a clear example of this is Nationwide ran a Super Bowl commercial in 2015 about this really cute boy. He keeps saying, I'm not going to be able to kiss a girl. I'm not going to be able to fly a plane. And then at the very end, he says, I can't do any of these things because I died in an accident. And then it shows like all these kind of like potential dramatic accident situations. And then it's like Nationwide is on your side. And it's like, what? I'm in the Super Bowl. I'm having fun. I'm with my buds. I'm drinking beer. And then you hit me with this like child death ad. And it's like accidental deaths. What's Nationwide really going to do to protect you? And so it was like, they focus grouped it. They had all this testing and it seemed like it was doing well, but they just didn't think about how it would emerge in the broader context. The classic kind of Kendall Jenner ad, where she's like, it's for Pepsi and she's apparently solving like police brutality at a protest by giving a Pepsi to the police officer. Like, when you're in the brand and you're thinking about it being fun and, in an advertising space, all of that makes sense. But then when you take it out into the real world and people bring their own kind of like expectations and assumptions against it, they're going to interpret it as what you think Kendall Jenner is going to solve, police brutality with a Pepsi. Like, how dumb are you, right? And so brand managers, strategists, they've kind of caught in this one view and failed to think about, okay, well, what's it going to look like for people? Like you were saying earlier, your kids like ad. People don't like ads. You have to assume the worst assumptions when consumers watch your ads. They're not going to be charitable. You as the brand manager get locked in this tunnel vision thinking, this is going to be great. This will be good. I have good intentions. But then when it gets out into the world, they're coming in already skeptical. They're going to interpret it not in kind of a positive light. And then that's when you get kind of these like unexpected thoughts and reactions that people just weren't, the brand managers weren't predicting.
Right. Well, and while we don't know specifically because we weren't in the rooms, I'm guessing for some people too, this is where the problem of that, like you said, with the tunnel vision, the biased leading in the way that you're asking the focus group, the questions that you asked them that are helping to prove your own point. I know overconfidence is on your list here as well, right? And so if I'm sure that this is what it is I'm trying to do, I can very easily ask a question to get someone to agree with what I think to get it down the line versus, you want to have that bigger context. And instead of trying to prove yourself right, I would say looking for those opportunities to say, how could we possibly have missed the mark? And, any of those, the pre-mortem of if this didn't land, like if we mess up and people hate this, what would it be for? Why would that happen? Is probably a good step. If you were going to give, as we have to wrap up the conversation, I know we could talk about ads forever. I'm excited for the next time we get to talk more about this. But if you were going to give people one key thing to be keeping in mind so that they can be on, our best ads list, most effective brands, what would you recommend to people to stay off that, worst dressed list, I guess, as it were for brands?
All right, I'll give you a framework that I teach in my class and is actually a framework that's used in Northwestern's kind of famous Super Bowl ad review, and it's called Ad Plan. And there's 6 things that you should be looking for in any ad. They're pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just kind of label them off one by one. The first is attention. Is this going to kind of catch a consumer's interest or be aware to it? Distinction. Is this different than what people are advertising, how they're advertising in this space, how advertising more broadly is going on? Positioning, what's that main message, that single kind of value proposition I want to communicate, and is it clear? Linkage, am I doing things to get people to help to remember the brand, like some of the stuff we talked about earlier? Amplification, what are the thoughts people are going to generate? What are the associations they're going to bring to mind, similar to what we were just talking about with tunnel vision? And then net equity. So how does this connect in with my broader brand image and perceptions? And if you can do well on each of those 6 points in this little ad plan framework, then you're already off to having a much better success or chance at success with your advertisement.
Love it. Have the plan for those ads. We got our ad plan going. Good acronym choice. We made it happen there. So perfect. Well, for everyone who is now so interested to learn more and to follow you, connect, whatever that happens to be, what's their best step to do so?
Yeah, I think I'd recommend coming to my website, everydaypsych.com. So it's everydaypsych, PSYCH.com. And there I regularly translate different things from psychology, behavioral economics, sociology, behavioral sciences more broadly, to how you can enhance your everyday life or enhance the marketing and persuasion that you're trying to employ.
Perfect. Love it. We'll, of course, have a link for Everyday Psych in the show notes. And thank you again, Jake, for joining me, not from State Farm, but
I get that a lot. I've got to dress up as him for Halloween one time.
Nice. My husband's name is Aaron. And so I'm sure you would potentially not be surprised to know how often he gets the Aaron joke, right? That's one that comes up a lot. I have nothing in this realm because Melina's not common yet, but maybe one day. Yet. Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me. It's been really fun chatting today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again to Dr. Jake Teeney for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I love digging in on ads and asking thoughtful questions about them. I wonder why they put that there. Did they intentionally do that before this other thing? What if they would have tried it this way? And yes, sometimes even what in the world was the point of that? Of course, it's one thing to see a bad ad and another one to not create them yourself. This is because of the way our brains work in two systems. System one, the subconscious, is that buying brain, which can automatically look at an ad and think, nope, or an email and say, spam. But when we sit down to create those ads and emails, we're in that system two processing, the conscious brain. And it has a tendency to get myopic, have tunnel vision, and miss so many things that are instantly obvious to a viewer or recipient. These insights from Jake today can hopefully help you to have more effective ads, emails, messages, everything moving forward with your brand. Remember that in order for your ad to be effective, you need to have a clear objective in mind. What is this meant to do? Who's it for? What are they doing now? And where would you like them to be different after experiencing the ad? You then need to overcome the 3 failure points. Failures of attention, which includes an ad that isn't distinct for the media channel or product domain, one that has too slow of a start, so people tune out before they even know who the brand is, and those where the copy or product is irrelevant to the viewer, which is a targeting problem typically. The next failure point is with that main message. In this case, there tend to be too many messages, and I typically focus on this one as it's a very common error that brands make, or that it's too metaphorical and abstract. Finally, you have those failures of memory. This means there is a weak connection to the brand, there aren't emotional high points, and your ads are too similar to the competition, which is really common since we're a herding species and like to look to others like us to determine what's safe and stick to that. But to stand out and have your brand be remembered, you need to break free of the herd. We didn't talk too much about the backfiring ads today, but the main things to keep in mind there are to ensure you don't let yourself have tunnel vision and fail to see how this thing could come off wrong in the wild. You also need to avoid overconfidence, not assume that the masses are going to give your brand the benefit of the doubt. They often don't. And try to avoid those negative biases getting layered into your ads. Finally, I love that Jake provided the ad plan framework. If you focus on attention, distinction, positioning, linkage, amplification, and net equity, you are well on your way to creating a coveted good ad, or dare I say, a great one. So what about you? Is there a bad ad that has stuck with you over the years? Like you think of bad ads and it always comes to mind. We would love to hear about and see it. Please come share it on social media. You'll find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. There are links in the show notes to make it easy to tag myself as well as Jake. And you can also find links to my top related past episodes, books, ways to get in touch, and more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/509. And thank you again to Dr. Jake Tini for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another Brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.